welcome. Please rise in body or spirit and join me in singing our first hymn this morning, Love Will Guide Us. Love will guide us, peace that's tried us, hope inside us, will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the dark night. If you cannot sing like angels, if you cannot sing before thousands, you can live from deep within you. You can change the world with your love. Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us, will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the night. Please be seated.
As Unitarian Universalists, we are called to take a courageous stand for social justice. Our second principle reminds us to practice justice in our relationships, and the sixth principle calls us to work for justice in our world. As we come together today and covenant that service is our prayer, let us contemplate how justice work is a spiritual practice for each of us.
I would like to invite up Arias Starachi. He will turn 6 on Thursday. He likes piano, music, and he has a drum set and loves cars. And would you join me in our words? We kindle this flame, symbol of our faith, for the light of truth, the warmth of community, the fire of love which calls us to work for justice. Good morning and welcome again on this International Women's Day. All of March is Women's History Month, but March 8th is specifically International Women's Day, and it is truly an international celebration. Welcome to Valley Unitarian Universalist Congregation. I'm Barbara Metz, and it is my honor to serve as your worship associate this morning. Welcome to this spiritual home of ours, a home where we welcome all. We welcome you regardless of where you are on your spiritual journey, wherever you came from, however you got here, and however you plan to leave. And hopefully, however you return. We welcome you, whoever and however you love, however you have composed your family. You are welcome here, and we hope to allow ourselves to be changed by your presence. By your coming through these doors, we have already been changed, and for that, we are grateful. I would like to extend an especially warm welcome to any newcomers or visitors that we have. If this is you and you are here for the first time or perhaps second, I ask you if you would have the courage to please stand now so that we know who you are. Thank you for that. It allows us to make sure that we greet you after the service and get to know who you are a little bit. There will also be a welcome table in the back of the sanctuary where we'll have a couple of members there to answer any questions you might have about VUU or Unitarian Universalism in general. There's also snacks out on the back patio, so please take time to grab a snack and some coffee before you go over there. As we do every Sunday, we have a pastoral care associate for after the service who will be up. Roz, where are you? Way back there. Roz will be up in the front of the sanctuary after the service if anyone needs a listening ear. We also have a comfort room over here in case anybody is antsy or you are sitting with somebody who is antsy. 2 extra announcements. One, there is produce out there from your UU dollars have helped pay for. And there are bags out there. Please help yourself to it. It's from the garden. And then I would like to extend a special welcome to our guest, Janine Gelsinger. She has graciously agreed to step into Andy's place this morning and lead our service and share her thoughts on social justice and how it relates to our and her spiritual practice. Janine is the new executive director of UU Jazz, Unitarian Universalist Justice, Arizona. She will be sharing about her life and the paths that led her to the role as executive director. And she'll invite us to consider our relationship with social justice activism as well as spiritual practice and suggest a way to have the two meet in a daily ritual. As Unitarian Universalists, we see our justice work as living out our values into the world. We covenant that service is our prayer. What might it look like to create a spiritual practice of justice work? And after the service, there will be a table with clipboards out and back where you can leave your contact information. We won't share it. And that will allow you to receive emails and opportunities for social justice work in the state. If one of your ways of doing justice work is with your wallet, there will be some yellow cards in back for you to fill out a pledge that will help them carry out their work throughout the year. So my own short reflection on my own social justice journey. My first question to myself was in the past week, how am I with social justice? I think of myself as pretty good on the personal relationship level, but I'm not so sure I get any gold stars in the broader, outside my immediate circle picture. I wasn't out there standing on the streets with a sign wearing a red T-shirt when it was red for Ed. I don't go to downtown Phoenix and stand on the steps of the Capitol building or City Hall, making my voice and beliefs heard. I haven't been down to the border or even seen the wall. I did offer to provide transportation to immigrants, but they didn't get dropped off, so I was kind of off the hook. I do sometimes take a bag of IHOP laundry. Yes, I have helped at Paz de Cristo. I've donated articles for various causes, whether it is women's personal hygiene or for shelters. And I make a monthly donation to Feeding America. I'm not a total bum. And I will fill out a yellow card after the service. I will open my wallet. But no big light shining down on me. In the 60s, I participated in a few marches, stood at some protests, rode a bus to Washington, and carried a few signs. But they were more like one-time events, and I didn't get very involved. I certainly didn't stay involved. It was more the thing to do. I believed in the causes, but I wasn't passionate. The first part of my adulthood I spent being a student, a mother, working, trying to make ends meet, and trying to make time not run completely out. I gave small bits to food banks, food drives, and other such organizations, but I can't remember giving anything of my time or mental energy to social justice. I was pretty much wrapped up in my own little world. So moving forward, I'm no longer a student. Kids are as much out of the house as teenagers or young adults tend to be. I have a career. In fact, I have 2 careers going. However, I can't say that my story around social justice changed a whole lot. I'm not all bad, and I give myself credit for work I did with the homeless community in New London, Connecticut. My late husband and I, through putting on benefit concerts both locally and throughout New England, became the largest private donors to the Homeless Hospitality Center of New London, Connecticut. And in addition to the money from concerts, 100% of the proceeds from our CD sales went to the Homeless Hospitality Center. I am proud of that, but I don't think I should get to ride out on those laurels. On the other hand, I never seem to know quite when to jump in. Something always seems to get in the way. And I've still been busy, moving back and forth across the United States a couple of times, starting and closing out a successful business. I've been a full-time caretaker to several family members, although I consider that an honor, not a chore. But all of that was time-consuming and energy-consuming. And then there's myself, taking care of myself, busy having more orthopedic surgeries than I care to count or share with you. But I have been busy, and I think I've got some pretty good excuses. But I also admit, when I see what some of you do, when I see I can do a really good job of berating myself for what I don't do. And then I hear what else is going on in your lives, and then I can really berate myself for what I don't do. So I'm hoping this morning that Janine plants within me the seed of inspiration. I can live with myself as where I am, but I could also do more for the greater good of our independent web. And service is our prayer, and I do believe in service. I'm looking forward to this morning's service and seeing how my spiritual practice can come in line with social justice. Let us join our voices in song. Will you please rise as you're, what? Wait, well, I was going to draw it out a little bit. So.
Oh, sorry.
So go ahead.
Well, I was going to tell you a little history about the song we're going to sing, if that's okay. It's from a Ghanaian band who first wrote and performed it in 1971. The band's name, it's spelled 2 different ways. I think it's Oisibisa. It's been transcribed in our hymnal by Isaiah Barnwell, whom some of you might know from Sweet Honey in the Rock. Now, it's been a long time since we sang this hymn. Some of you probably have never sung it. So I'm going to practice the main part with you, because there's a phrase in here that goes we-ah-ya or woy-ah-ya, however you want to say it, that means we are going. So we're continuing our songs about the journey this morning. So I'm going to practice a little bit with you. So would you give me a note? It goes woy-ah-ya, woy-ah-ya, woy-ah-ya. We are going, heaven knows where we are going, but we know within, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. It will be hard, we know, and the road will be muddy and rough, but we'll get there. Heaven knows how
I'd like to invite all the children up for our children's collection, which we donate to the UUSC, and also for our children's story. Go ahead and sit down, girls. Go ahead and sit. So because Janine is here today, I think I'm going to lower this. I think I'm not going to lower that. Okay. It's okay. So because we have this guest speaker here today, Bentley, I need you to turn around and sit and we don't hit people. I thought that we would do a story about how we can help the world. Did you hear in the introduction that there's different ways that you can help people? Sometimes people give money, sometimes people go on marches, sometimes you find a project that you want to do. So this is a story. This is a story about a girl in Africa who found a way to help. So her name is Aissatou, and she lives in Gambia, which is a country in Africa. And it's a true story about how she did something about the problem with plastic trash bags in her country. Yeah. So one day, she was walking. Guys, we are squirrely today. Listen to Marcy's story. So one day, she was walking home from picking fruit, and she dropped her basket that was full of fruit. It tumbled over and over. The basket was broken. The basket was made out of palm leaves, so Aissatou knew that eventually it would break down and go back to the earth. And then she got really excited because she saw a plastic bag lying on the ground. So she picked up the plastic bag and put her fruit in it and took it home to show her grandmother. But her grandmother frowned. She said, "There's so many of these in the city." So Aissatou used her plastic bag for a few days, but eventually, you know this, it ripped, right? Like the ones that we have at home, they rip. So she just dropped it on the ground and walked away. And she walked by it like day after day. She saw it still sitting there. It did not go back to the earth like the palm leaf basket did. Eventually, Aissatou saw more plastic bags around her village. They were all over the place, hundreds of them even. As the years passed, the pile of plastic garbage grew bigger and bigger. Mosquitoes were swarming near it. Goats were going through that garbage looking for food. And then goats started to die because they accidentally ate the plastic bags instead of the food. Yes. Aissatou knew she had to do something about this trash. So she held her breath. She kind of pinched her nose. Do you see that in the picture? And she reached in and she grabbed one of the plastic bags. And she kept grabbing them until she had about 100 of them. So she had her friends help her. They washed the bags and hung them out to dry. And then they cut the bags into these strips. And they made thread out of them. And they taught themselves how to crochet those strips of plastic bags. Some of the villagers laughed at them. But Aissatou and her friends believed in what they were doing. And they sat by the candlelight at night, crocheting away, even though people were making fun of them. Turn around, you're not behaving right. The women crocheted the plastic thread into colorful purses. And they sold one purse. And then they sold 2 and 10. And eventually everybody seemed to want these purses. In 2007, the women's purses started selling in other countries around the world. So did you think she did a good thing by collecting up these trash bags? No. How come? Did it help clean up her land a little bit? Her country? I think it helped clean up her village. And then did people have jobs making these purses and they were able to make some money? I think it was a good way to help her country. So we are now going to sing the children out. Ta-da!
This little light of mine. This little light of mine. Let it shine. This little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Building up the world, I'm gonna let it shine. Building up the world, I'm gonna let it shine. Building up the world, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Y'all, I found a box to stand on. Andy and Barbara are both a little taller than I am. Will the ushers please come forward? With gratitude for the abundance in our own lives, we give for the life and mission of this congregation.
We enter now a time of meditation and prayer, and we're going to start with a centering hymn. We've done this before, meditation on breathing. We're going to start with the drone, as it's called, to kind of center us. So find a comfortable spot in your mind, in your spirit, in your body, and we'll start with the drone. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I'll breathe
A reading from Adrienne Marie Brown, from her book, and my favorite book, Emergent Strategy, Shaping Change and Changing Worlds. Everything is connected. The soil needs rain, organic matter, air, worms, and life in order to do what it needs to do to give and receive life. Each element is an essential component. Organizing takes humility and selflessness and patience and rhythm, while our ultimate goal of liberation will take many expert components. Some of us build and fight for land, for healthy bodies, healthy relationships, clean air, water, homes, safety, dignity, and humanizing education. Others of us fight for food and political prisoners and abolition and environmental justice. Our work is intersectional and multifaceted. Nature teaches us that our work has to be nuanced and steadfast. And more than anything, we need each other. We need each other. We need each other at our highest natural glory in order to get free. Wow, that was beautiful. Thank you. When Barbara said that she sometimes makes herself feel bad about the justice work she's not doing, that is something that makes me feel bad. I do not have that hand-eye coordination at all to be able to do that. Good morning, Valley. I'm Janine, and like Barbara said, I'm the executive director of UU Jazz, which is the Unitarian Universalist Justice Arizona Network. At UU Jazz, we have 4 parts to our mission. We connect UUs across the state working for justice. We support justice ministries in congregations. We develop partnerships with grassroots organizations from around the state doing justice work that's in line with our values. And we work to sway public policy in the state of Arizona to be more in line with our UU beliefs. That last one's harder than it looks. I was really excited to be here with you today. And this morning, I did what I always do before I have to speak. I got nervous, and I started to rewrite my sermon. And this is the 10th time I've done this sermon, but it happens every time. It happens every time because there's always something, right? Every week holds some great injustice that we feel called to speak on. I wanted to talk about International Women's Day and how even though this is a day and a month celebrating women, our country is still not ready to have women in leadership at the same place that we put men. And I wanted to speak, thank you. And I wanted to speak about some wins we've had recently. Along with a coalition of 10 other organizations, UU Jazz was able to convince the Phoenix mayor and city council to implement civilian oversight of the Phoenix Police Department. Thank you. We went from the largest city in the country without any civilian oversight at all to the most progressive model in the country last week. And so every time I do this, I want to write a whole sermon based on what's going on recently. But then I get dressed and I put on my pin that I always wear when I preach. And it says, "Move at the speed of trust." It's a quote from Adrienne Marie Brown, who our reading was by as well. And it reminds me that the most important first step whenever we organize together is to build relationship. Because there's nothing we can do if we're not all together. There's no way to build power with someone that you can't trust. And Brené Brown, who is another woman that I really admire, says that trust doesn't come from me coming up here and showing you my resume and telling you all the wonderful things I've done so that you'll trust me. And it definitely doesn't come from me coming up here and lecturing you about social justice. Trust comes from vulnerability. And so what I remind myself is that the first time I visit a congregation, the most important thing to do is to build that trust by being a little vulnerable with you. And my hope is that if I'm able to be a little vulnerable and speak about some of my journey, that you'll open yourselves up to building relationship with me too, to telling me about your journeys and letting me get to know you, so that we can be in community together and we can come from a place of trust as we build and work towards social justice. So with that in mind, I'd like to tell you a story. And it starts when I was born in Scottsdale, Arizona, to a white, Republican, wealthy, Catholic family. And we weren't Catholics with a small c, Christmas and Easter Catholics. We were big C Catholics. We were very involved in the church. My mother taught Sunday school from the time I was a kid. And when I was 10 years old, I started co-teaching classes with her. I was kind of a precocious kid. I actually wrote most of the curriculum, but don't tell my mom I told you. And I was so involved that by the time I was a teenager, I was voted Youth of the Year of the Phoenix Catholic Diocese. I know you're very impressed. Hold your applause for later. And what that meant was I got to serve Mass with the bishop at St. Simon and Jude's Cathedral downtown in Phoenix. That was the first time I was in a pulpit like this one. Needless to say, I liked it. And later that year, because I was a teenager, I started asking questions. She says, uh-oh. Now, as Unitarian Universalists, we love when our kids ask questions, right? We encourage it. Keep questioning, kids. And in the Catholic community that I was in at the time, not so much. They didn't appreciate my questions. They didn't like that I started questioning about hell and God and sex, because teenagers ask questions about sex. They didn't like when I said that I didn't think my LGBTQ friends were doing anything wrong. And as the time came that I started asking these questions, two major events happened in my life. First, my mother, who was on the finance committee, I'm sure some of you are familiar with that, and was keeping the books for the congregation or the church at the time, found that our priest was embezzling money from the church. And shortly thereafter, the bishop, who I'd served Mass with, who offered to write my college recommendation letters, hit someone with his car and drove away. So there I was at 16 years old having a crisis of faith. All the leaders that I had been taught to look up to were not walking the talk that they had said. And I didn't know what to do. And so I talked to my parents. And at the time, I didn't like their answer, but now as a mother, I understand. It was reasonable. They said, Janine, we're not going to make you stay, but before you go, we'd like you to talk to Kathy, who was the director of religious education. She was a family friend and someone I trusted. And so I went in to talk to her, and I told her the doubts I was having and the hypocrisy that I was seeing between what we were preaching and what we were doing. And she said to me, Janine, you are a leader among the youth. You are a leader in this church. And if you leave, other kids will go with you. And their souls will be on your hands. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I had a similar reaction to you all. And so at 16 years old, I walked away from the church, and I was happily unchurched for many years until something changed in my life. Can you guess what it is? Yeah, my daughter Vivian was born. And she was sick. She was in the NICU. She was on a ventilator, struggling to breathe. And as a terrified new mother with no idea what to do, I turned to my partner and I said, do you think we should baptize her? And he said, Janine, we're atheists. And yes, that was true. Do you think we should do it anyway? And I didn't know at the time what I was looking for. I didn't know what was missing. And I knew that I didn't believe we needed to baptize her to cleanse her of original sin. And I didn't think that if she didn't make it, she would go to hell. I didn't believe those things, but I was looking for something. I wanted a moment to mark how special this moment was, that the birth of this child was bigger than her tiny body. It was bigger than me and our family. It was something that belonged in community. It was something that was connected to spirit. And I didn't know what that looked like, but I knew I needed to find something because I knew I couldn't raise this child alone. None of us can do it alone. And I knew I needed to connect to something bigger. And I didn't know what that was until one night I was scrolling through Facebook, as you do sometimes as parents when your child's asleep, and I came upon a quiz. It said, what religion should you be? Now, I like to take quizzes on Facebook, but most of the time they're like, what Game of Thrones character are you? And this one was different. It was long. It had a lot of theological questions that I hadn't thought about in a long time. And the answer came back, Unitarian Universalist. And I said, what is that? And so I went to Google, and I was searching for, what this might mean, and I asked my partner at the time to take the quiz as well. Now, he had grown up without religion at all. In fact, he was very skeptical of organized religion, and he got the same result. Yeah. So shortly after that, in Denver, we went to check out a UU congregation, and after we moved to Phoenix shortly after, we stepped in the walls of a UU congregation for the first time, and you might say, I'm kind of a joiner because here I am today. Since then, I've done a lot of work trying to piece through some of the religious trauma that I had suffered. At first, I didn't like to hear any God language in a church. I was uncomfortable with the word prayer, and I certainly wasn't going to adopt a spiritual practice. But as I grew stronger in my Unitarian Universalist identity, I started to kind of experiment a little bit with what incorporating some of that ritual that I had grown up with might look like. And so I came upon a few different spiritual practices because my friend, Anthony Johnson, taught a class, and how he defined spiritual practice was anything you do that connects you to something bigger. Anything. And that something bigger can be anything it is for you, right? Spirit or earth-centered traditions or God. And the first thing that was suggested for me as a spiritual practice was nature practices, right? There's lots of UUs that really connect with nature, and it was suggested that I try hiking as a spiritual practice. So I tried it, and I can see how when your feet connect to the earth, when it's still and quiet and you can hear the sounds of nature all around you and not the city sounds that you're used to, and your mind gets still, how that can be a beautiful spiritual practice, and it helped me understand what that might mean. But as it turns out, I don't so much like to sweat, and so hiking was not the perfect fit for me. And Anthony told me that you can take a spiritual practice out of the closet, take it off the hanger, try it on, and if it's not the right fit, you can hang it back up, and it's probably going to work for someone else. So the first time I really experienced a spiritual practice that fit for me, it won't surprise some of you that I was at a protest. It was May Day, and I was downtown in Phoenix marching with Puente Human Rights Movement and some of our justice partners, and we were marching for workers' rights. And I was at the back of the line because I had a stroller with me, so I was with the other parents who, we walk slower, we have to keep stopping for snacks and, wiping kids' hands. And in fact, we were so far behind that the front of the line had turned the corner and we could barely hear the chants anymore. Now, someone in that moment handed me a megaphone. I don't know if you've ever held a megaphone before, but it is quite the spiritual practice, and not just because of the little bit of power that you get from it, but they asked me to start leading the chants, and at first I said, no, we leave that to folks most affected. They're doing that at the front of the line. It doesn't need to be me. But really, in this small group of just parents, there wasn't anyone else. That experience, leading a call and response with the people marching along with me, I felt connected. I felt connected to the movement. I felt connected to my friends around me. I felt connected to the greater movement that was happening throughout the country on that day. I felt connected to our ancestors, folks who marched for workers' rights, who ensured a 40-hour work week, the end to child labor, safe working practices for all of us. And I also felt connected to the future because our kids were there and they were learning how to make their voices heard too. Feeling that connection in that activity was when I first realized what some of my spiritual practices could look like. But as Barbara pointed out, activism doesn't mean anything if it's not accessible to all. And not everyone needs to chain themselves to the pipeline. There is a way for all of us to do activism. And for all of us, it's not marching. So I developed a second spiritual practice that I'd like to share with you. This one I started because I was thinking about my grandmother. And my grandmother would get up every morning. She'd make the coffee first, because that's the most important ritual in the morning, right? Spiritual practice of the coffee pot. And then she would sit down at her kitchen table, open the paper, read the paper, and then she would get out her rosary. I'm not going to ask you to say the rosary. I see some of your faces. That's not where this is going. But she had something physical and tangible that she did every day. She set intentional time to do. It was the same every day, but she took that moment to connect to her values and to connect to what was happening in the world and to see a connection between those two. Now, I was at General Assembly this summer, and I went to the youth worship. If you ever go to GA, go to the youth worship. It's one of the most amazing things at General Assembly. And they won't point it out to you because it's kind of, undercover, but you can sneak in the back and watch. And the youth, most of whom had not grown up with the religious trauma that I did, that some of you may have had, aren't as afraid about embracing religious practices. And they had built an altar. Now, 5 years ago, I never would have thought I'd be standing up here telling you that I have an altar in my home. But I saw the way the youth had done this, and I started thinking about what that could look like for me. And so in my house, there's a square tray. It's our altar space. And everyone in my family is invited to put anything on it that makes them feel connected to something bigger. For my kids, sometimes it's that special rock that you find in the park or on the beach. That's that really important special rock that you need to save. Or flowers, things they find outside. Sometimes it's that little slip of fortune cookie that really speaks to you that day that goes on the altar. I have photos of my grandmother and pieces of poetry and readings from people that inspire me. I do have a candle on my altar. It's a Divina candle, Our Lady of Guadalupe, but the face is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Anything that connects you to something bigger, right? And every morning, I take my kids to school, and when I come back home and I have a minute to myself, I bring out my altar, I light the candle, and I think about my values. I think about what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist, what my values call me to do. And then I pick up my phone, which you'll see has a sticker that says, "This is my spiritual practice," because the next thing I do is fill out that petition, call my senator or mayor or city council member or representative, or get on request to speak, and I make my voice heard. I talk about my UU values and how they call me to do justice work. And it's real short, 3 to 5 minutes, because I think it's important to have that intentional time, but to keep that time short, because otherwise we get overwhelmed, right? And that's not an accident. It's not an accident that injustices are coming at us from all sides, from women's rights to reproductive rights to LGBTQ rights and trans rights, for climate justice and racial justice. It's at all sides, and that's on purpose. It's because people in power want you to feel small. They want you to feel like you can't make a difference. What's your one voice going to do? But I'm here to tell you it makes a difference, because when I call my representative, Greg Stanton's office, I talk to his receptionist, Becca, because this is what happens when you call every day. You get to know people. And you know what Becca tells me? She says that whatever issue I'm calling about, I'm in the minority. There are more people calling against immigration justice than when I call. And that's because they're better organized, right? But when I call, I want to be that tally mark on the side of justice. I want to be that tally mark on the side of love. I want to be that tally mark that says our UU values are so important that we are compelled to make our voices heard. And it's something I can do, because if I do it every day, it builds my muscle for justice. It lets me know that I can make a difference. I'm here to tell you all that our UU values are world-changing if you're only brave enough to speak them out into the world. Thank you.
Please remain standing or rise in body or spirit as you're able for our closing hymn. This is another song about the journey, and it's a plea for guidance. And so we're going to sing it through, all the verses, and then we're going to repeat the first verse at the end, just with our voices, because our voices are strong, and we need to make them heard. by me while I run this race. Stand by me while I run this race. Stand by me while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Search my heart while I run this race. Search my heart while I run this race. Search my heart while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain.
Please join me in our chalice words. Though we extinguish the chalice,
Adrienne Marie Brown tells us to move at the speed of trust. May we go forth from this place to build relationship, widen the circles, and when that trust is built, to act in the name of justice. May it be so.